his wealthy neighbor. He possesses more fully developed feelings, his native northern coldness is overborne by the unrestrained development of his passions and their control over him. The cultivation of the understanding which so greatly strengthens the selfish tendency of the English bourgeois, which has made selfishness his predominant trait, and concentrated all his emotional power upon the single point of money greed, is wanting in the working man, whose passions are therefore strong and mighty as those of the foreigner. English nationality is annihilated in the working man. Since, as we have seen, no single field for the exercise of his manhood is left him, save his opposition to the whole conditions of his life, it is natural that exactly in this opposition he should be most manly, noblest, most worthy of sympathy. We shall see that all the energy, all the activity of the working men is directed to this point, and that even their attempts to attain general education all stand in direct connection with this. True, we shall have single acts of violence and even of brutality to report, but it must always be kept in mind that the social war is avowedly raging in England, and that, whereas it is in the interest of the bourgeoisie to conduct this war hypocritically, under the disguise of peace and even of philanthropy, the only help for the workingman consists in laying bare the true state of things, and destroying this hypocrisy, that the most violent attacks of the workers upon the bourgeoisie and its servants are only the open, undisguised expression of that which the bourgeoisie perpetrates secretly, treacherously against the workers. The revolt of the workers began soon after the first industrial development, and has passed through several phases. The investigation of their importance in the history of the English people I must reserve for separate treatment, limiting myself meanwhile to such bare facts as serve to characterize the condition of the English proletariat. The earliest, crudest, and least fruitful form of this rebellion was that of crime. The working man lived in poverty and want, and saw that others were better off than he. It was not clear to his mind why he, who did more for society than the rich idler, should be the one to suffer under these conditions. Want conquered his inherited respect for the sacredness of property, and he stole. We have seen how crime increased with the extension of manufacture, how the yearly number of arrests bore a constant relation to the number of bales of cotton annually consumed. The workers soon realized that crime did not help matters. The criminal could protest against the existing order of society only singly, as one individual. The whole might of society was brought to bear upon each criminal, and crushed him with its immense superiority. Besides, theft was the most primitive form of protest, and for this reason, if for no other, it never became the universal expression of the public opinion of the working men, however much they might approve of it in silence. As a class, they first manifested opposition to the bourgeoisie, when they resisted the introduction of machinery at the very beginning of the industrial period. The first inventors, Arkwright and others, were persecuted in this way and their machines destroyed. Later, there took place a number of revolts against machinery, in which the occurrences were almost precisely the same as those of the printers' disturbances in Bohemia in 1844. Factories were demolished and machinery destroyed. This form of opposition also was isolated, restricted to certain localities, and directed against one feature only of our present social arrangements. When a momentary end was attained, the whole weight of social power fell upon the unprotected evildoers, and punished them to its heart's content, while the machinery was introduced nonetheless. A new form of opposition had to be found. At this point, help came in the shape of a law enacted by the old, unreformed, oligarchic Tory Parliament, a law which never could have passed the House of Commons later, when the Reform Bill had legally sanctioned the distinction between bourgeoisie and proletariat, and made the bourgeoisie a ruling class. This was enacted in 1824, and repealed all laws by which coalitions between working men for labor purposes had hitherto been forbidden. The working men obtained a right previously restricted to the aristocracy and bourgeoisie, the right of free association. Secret coalitions had, it is true, previously existed, but could never achieve great results. In Glasgow, as Simons 214 relates, a general strike of weavers had taken place in 1812, which was brought about by secret association. It was repeated in 1822, and on this occasion vitriol was thrown into the faces of the two working men who would not join the association, and were therefore regarded by the members as traitors to their class. Both the assaulted lost the use of their eyes in consequence of the injury. So too, in 1818, the Association of Scottish Miners was powerful enough to carry on a general strike. These associations required their members to take an oath of fidelity and secrecy, had regular lists, treasurers, bookkeepers, and local branches. But the secrecy with which everything was conducted crippled their growth. When, on the other hand, the working man received in 1824 the right of free association, these combinations were very soon spread over all England, and attained great power. In all branches of industry trades unions were formed with the outspoken intention of protecting the single working man against the tyranny and neglect of the bourgeoisie. Their objects were to deal, en masse, as a power, with the employers, to regulate the rate of wages according to the profit of the latter, to raise it when opportunity offered, and to keep it uniform in each trade throughout the country. Hence they tried to settle with the capitalists a scale of wages, to be universally adhered to, and ordered out on strike the employees of such individuals as refused to accept the scale. They aimed further to keep up the demand for labor, by limiting the number of apprentices, and so to keep wages high, to counteract, as far as possible, the indirect wages reductions which the manufacturers brought about by means of new tools and machinery, and finally, to assist unemployed working men financially. This they do either directly, or by means of a card, to legitimate the bearer as a society man, and with which the working man wanders from place to place, supported by his fellow workers, and instructed as to the best opportunity for finding employment. This is tramping, and the wanderer a tramp. To attain these ends, a president and secretary are engaged at a salary, since it is to be expected that no manufacturer will employ such persons, and a committee collects the weekly contributions and watches over their expenditure for the purposes of the association. When it proved possible and advantageous, the various trades of single districts united in a federation, and held delegate conventions at set times. The attempt has been made in single cases, to unite the workers of one branch over all England in one great union, and several times in 1830 for the first time, to form one universal trades association for the whole United Kingdom, with a separate organisation for each trade. These associations, however, never held together long, and were seldom realised even for the moment, since an exceptionally universal excitement is necessary to make such a federation possible and effective. The means usually employed by these unions for attaining their ends are the following. If one or more employers refuse to pay the wage specified by the union, a deputation is sent, or a petition forwarded to the workingmen, you see, know how to recognize the absolute power of the lord of the factory in his little state. If this proves unavailing, the union commands the employees to stop work, and all hands go home. This strike is either partial when one or several, or general when all employers in the trade, refuse to regulate wages according to the proposals of the union. So far go the lawful means of the union, assuming the strike to take effect after the expiration of the legal notice, which is not always the case. But these lawful means are very weak when there are workers outside a union, or when members separate from it for the sake of the momentary advantage offered by the bourgeoisie. Especially in the case of partial strikes can the manufacturer readily secure recruits from these black sheep who are known as knobsticks, and render fruitless the efforts of the united workers. Knobsticks are usually threatened, insulted, beaten, or otherwise maltreated by the members of the union, intimidated, in short, in every way. Prosecution follows, and as the law-abiding bourgeoisie has the power in its own hands, the force of the union is broken almost every time by the first unlawful act, the first judicial procedure against its members. The history of these unions is a long series of defeats of the workingmen, interrupted by a few isolated victories. All these efforts naturally cannot alter the economic law according to which wages are determined by the relation between supply and demand in the labour market. Hence the unions remain powerless against all great forces which influence this relation. In a commercial crisis the union itself must reduce wages or dissolve wholly, and in a time of considerable increase in the demand for labor, it cannot fix the rate of wages higher than would be reached spontaneously by the competition of the capitalists among themselves. But in dealing with minor, single influences they are powerful. If the employer had no concentrated, collective opposition to expect, he would in his own interest gradually reduce wages to a lower and lower point. Indeed, the battle of competition which he has to wage against his fellow manufacturers would force him to do so, and wages would soon reach the minimum. But this competition of the manufacturers among themselves is, under average conditions, somewhat restricted by the opposition of the working men. Every manufacturer knows that the consequence of a reduction not justified by conditions to which his competitors also are subjected, would be a strike.